Some stories don't start with love. Mine certainly didn't. From the moment I could understand words, I knew I wasn't wanted, not the way a child should be. My brother was the star, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. And me, I was the mistake, the extra, the afterthought. I spent years trying to prove my worth, to earn something that should have been given freely. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. And then, one day, they made it official. They threw me away. No goodbye, no hesitation, just a garbage bag filled with my things and a door slammed shut behind me. But here's the thing about being discarded. Sometimes, you come back stronger. I always knew I wasn't the favourite. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a fact, something as real as the air I breathed. My twin brother, the golden child, the one destined for greatness, had everything handed to him. My parents spoke about his future like it was set in stone, a prophecy waiting to unfold. And me, I was the extra, the one who had to prove her worth, the one who could never quite measure up. Every achievement of mine was a footnote in his success story, every compliment, laced with comparison. "Why can't you be more like him?" became the chorus of my childhood. It wasn't just words, it was actions. Birthdays were a spectacle for him. Balloons, cakes, crowds of people. My birthdays? A last-minute dinner, if that. He got piano, lessons, football practice, summer camps. I got rules, restrictions, and a never-ending list of things I wasn't allowed to do. He had sleepovers, friends coming and going as they pleased. I wasn't even allowed to invite a single friend over. It was like I was living in the shadow of a sun too bright, burning away any space for me to exist. But the worst part? I started believing I deserved it. The only person who saw me, really saw me, was my grandmother. She had this way of slipping chocolates into my hand, whispering, "This one's just for you." Sometimes she'd sneak me a little money, tell me to buy something nice. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that I wasn't invisible. Enough to make me feel like maybe, just maybe, I mattered to someone. I clung to those moments like lifelines, like proof that I wasn't just some forgotten extra in my own family. But even then, deep down, I knew. Affection from one person couldn't undo years of neglect, and as the years passed, the imbalance only grew. The expectations for him soared, while mine sank lower and lower. I watched as my parents invested in his future, pushing him towards success while barely acknowledging my presence. It was a slow realization, but one day it hit me like a punch to the gut. I was never going to be enough for them. No matter how hard I tried, no matter what I achieved, I would always be second place in a race I never even signed up for. And that was just the beginning. Every year, my brother's birthday was an event. Huge cakes, decorations, a house full of people. It was the kind of celebration that made him feel like a king. My birthdays? A quick happy birthday at breakfast, if that. No parties, no gifts that weren't last-minute afterthoughts. I learned early on that excitement wasn't meant for me, that the things that made my brother glow with joy were just not in the cards for me. And when I was younger, I thought maybe it was my fault. Maybe I just wasn't the kind of kid worth celebrating. It wasn't just the birthdays. He had friends over whenever he wanted, loud sleepovers filled with laughter, games, and the kind of fun I only got to witness from my room. I, on the other hand, wasn't even allowed to invite a single friend inside. "Girls make too much noise," my mother would say, rolling her eyes. It was ridiculous. He and his friends practically turned the house into a stadium every weekend, and yet I was the problem. I stopped asking after a while. What was the point? It was just another reminder that the rules weren't the same for both of us. The only person who ever made me feel like I mattered was my grandmother. She had this way of noticing me when no one else did. "Here," she'd say, slipping a piece of chocolate into my hand like it was a secret treasure. Sometimes she'd press a small bill into my palm and wink. "Buy yourself something nice." It wasn't about the money or the sweets. It was about being seen, about someone acknowledging that I deserved a little kindness. And even though those moments were small, they were everything to me. But kindness from one person didn't change. The way my own parents treated me. The favoritism, the double standards. It was like an invisible weight pressing down on me, shaping the way I saw myself. I wasn't important enough to celebrate. I wasn't trusted enough to have friends over. I wasn't worth the same effort they gave my brother. And as much as I wanted to believe otherwise, the truth was painfully clear. In my family, love wasn't given freely. It was earned. And apparently I hadn't done enough. If there was one thing my parents excelled at, it was making me feel small. It didn't matter how hard I tried. My grades were never good enough. My interests were a waste of time. My dreams. Laughable. Maybe if you focused less on nonsense, you'd actually accomplish something, my father would say, shaking his head. Meanwhile, my brother could come home with barely passing grades, and my mother would proudly say, "He's got bigger things ahead of him." I wanted to scream, to ask why nothing I did was ever enough. But I already knew the answer. It wasn't just words, it was control. They dictated every aspect of my life. No extracurricular activities, a distraction, no social media, a danger. No freedom, just rules, restrictions, and expectations I could never meet. The moment I downloaded Snapchat, desperate to feel a little normal, they found out, and their response, pure overreaction. They took my phone, deleted the app, and then went a step further. They took the door off my bedroom. "Privacy is a privilege," my mother said coldly. Just like that, my space, my safe haven, was gone. My brother, of course, took full advantage of it. He'd walk past my room, smirking, making comments just loud enough for me to hear. Guess, someone can't be trusted. He had a way of twisting everything, feeding my parents' worst assumptions. If he wanted to frame me for something, he could. If he wanted to humiliate me, it was effortless. And I had no defense, because in their eyes, I was already guilty of something. I just didn't know what yet. I stopped fighting after a while. What was the point? Every attempt to stand up for myself was met with punishment. Every small act of defiance turned into proof that I was the problem. The walls of that house felt like a prison, and I was trapped in a life where nothing belonged. To me. Not my choices, not my privacy, not even my own reputation. But if I thought things couldn't get worse, I was wrong. Because my brother, he wasn't done ruining me yet. At first, the lies were small, little distortions of the truth, tiny exaggerations that made me look bad and made him look innocent. "She broke the vase," he'd say, even though it had been his elbow that knocked it over. "She was being rude," he'd insist when I barely spoke. My parents never questioned him. They never asked for my side. His words were facts, and mine just noise. I told myself it was annoying but harmless. I had no idea he was just getting started. Then came the bruises. He figured out that if he looked like a victim, people would believe him even faster. I saw it happen, the way he'd pinch his own arm just enough to leave a mark, the way he'd rub his skin raw and then walk downstairs, voice trembling as he told our parents, "She hit me." The first time, I laughed. I thought there was no way they'd actually believe something so absurd. But then I saw my mother's face. I saw the disgust, the disappointment, the certainty. And suddenly, it wasn't funny anymore. At school, the rumours spread like wildfire. I'd catch whispers in the hallway, glances that lasted a second too long. I heard she gets violent. Her own brother is scared of her. Friends I'd had since childhood started pulling away. Teachers watched me differently. No one asked if it was true, they just accepted it. And the worst part, he knew exactly what he was doing. Every time I saw that smug little smile on his face, I wanted to scream. But what was the point? No one was listening. The weight of it all crushed me. My parents wouldn't even look me in the eyes anymore. My brother had rewritten my entire identity, turned me into a villain in my own life story. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, it did, because the school was about to get involved. And this time, there would be consequences. It started with a call to the principal's office. My name echoed through the school's speakers, a sharp sound that made my stomach drop. I walked through the halls, every step heavier than the last, as the whispers followed me. I knew what this was about. I knew who was behind it. And yet, some foolish part of me still believed I could explain, that I could finally make someone see the truth. But the moment I stepped into that office, I saw my parents' faces, cold, furious, unshakable. My brother sat beside them, looking just scared enough to sell the act. The accusations were brutal. The school had received multiple reports about my violent behaviour. The principal flipped through a file, witness statements, complaints, even photos of the bruises my brother had carefully crafted on his own skin. I tried to fight back, tried to plead my case, but every word out of my mouth was met with doubt. My father didn't even let me finish before shaking his head. Enough. We've heard enough. And just like that, the decision was made. I was suspended, effective immediately. The drive home was silent. Not the kind of silence that begs to be filled, but the kind that suffocates. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand to be heard. But when we pulled into the driveway, I saw the suitcases in the living room, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. My mother stood there, arms crossed, voice devoid of emotion. "You can't stay here anymore," she said. My father didn't argue. My brother just watched, victorious. And me? I stood frozen, trying to process the fact that my own parents had chosen to believe a lie over their own daughter. They didn't even let me pack. They tossed my things into garbage bags, shoving them toward me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience they were finally getting rid of. I kept waiting for them to change their minds, for some part of them to hesitate. But they never did. The front door opened, and with one final glare they made it clear. I wasn't welcome anymore. And just like that, the only home I had ever known was gone. But if they thought they had broken me, they were wrong. Because someone still believed in me. And she was on her way. I didn't even have time to process what had happened before I heard the familiar hum of an engine outside. My grandmother's car pulled into the driveway, and for the first time that day, I felt something other than despair. Relief. She stepped out, her expression unreadable, but the moment she saw the garbage bags at my feet, something inside her snapped. She turned to my parents, voice sharp, unwavering. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" My mother scoffed. My father folded his arms. But for once, their usual intimidation tactics didn't work. My grandmother wasn't afraid of them. "If you throw her out, I'll make sure the police know exactly what's been happening in this house," she continued, her voice low but dangerous. My parents exchanged a glance, but they didn't argue. They didn't have to. They had already made their choice. My grandmother sighed, shaking her head before turning to me. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's go home." Home. A word that had never really belonged to me until that moment. I grabbed my bags and followed her, not bothering to look back. There was nothing left for me in that house. The first night at my grandmother's place was strange. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for her kindness to come with conditions. But it never did. She made me dinner, let me shower in peace, and gave me a room with a door that locked. It was the kind of basic respect I had never experienced before, and I didn't know how to react. "You're safe now," she said, squeezing my hand. Safe. I repeated the word in my head, trying to believe it. But after years of being treated like an outsider in my own family, it was hard to accept that I actually mattered to someone. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, I started to breathe again. My grandmother didn't push me to talk, didn't make me feel like I owed her anything. She just let me exist, and for the first time in my life, that was enough. I wasn't someone's disappointment. I wasn't a burden. I was just me. And with that realization came something even more important, a sense of possibility. Maybe my life didn't have to be defined by the people who had thrown me away. Maybe, for the first time, I could actually decide who I wanted to be. Starting over wasn't easy, but for the first time I had control over my own life. My grandmother supported me, but I knew I couldn't rely on her forever. I needed to build something for myself, College seemed impossible at first, too expensive, too overwhelming. But I refused to let my past dictate my future. I applied for scholarships, took out loans and worked part-time. It was exhausting, balancing school and work, but every dollar I earned felt like proof that I wasn't powerless anymore. I wasn't the lost, discarded girl my parents had made me out to be. I was more than that. Somewhere along the way, I discovered a hidden talent, writing. It started as a way to vent, a way to make sense of everything I had been through. But then people started noticing. A professor encouraged me to take it seriously. A small blog post I wrote went viral. Before I knew it, I was getting paid to write. Freelance gigs turned into steady clients, and suddenly I wasn't just making money, I was building a career. The idea of being financially independent had always felt like a distant dream, but here I was, making it happen. My corporate job came later, a stable paycheck that offered security, but I never let go of the freelance work. It gave me freedom, options. It allowed me to dream beyond a 9-to-5, and soon those dreams turned into something real. I started travelling, working from different cities, then different countries. What once felt impossible, having a life completely separate from my family's control, became my new reality. I was no longer trapped by their rules, their expectations. I was free. And yet, even with all my success, their shadows still lingered. I didn't hear from them for years, and I had no reason to reach out. I had moved on. Or at least I thought I had. Because one day, out of nowhere, my past came knocking, again. And this time it wasn't to tear me down, it was to ask for something. It started with an email, then another, and another. At first I thought it was spam, some generic invite that wasn't meant for me. But when I opened it, I froze. My old university was reaching out, asking me to speak at an event. Me. The girl who had been discarded, the one who was never supposed to amount to anything. They wanted me to share my story, my career, my success. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, the past and present colliding in a way I never expected. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep my distance. But another part, it wanted to be seen. The event came faster than I expected. I stood in front of a packed auditorium, gripping the microphone, my heart pounding, and then I spoke. Not just about my career, but about resilience, about how failure isn't final, about how, sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hold you back, but that doesn't mean they get to define you. The applause at the end felt surreal, like some alternate version of my life had finally crossed paths with reality. And just when I thought that moment was big enough, something even bigger happened. A journalist had been in the audience. Days. Later, I got a call, an invitation for an interview on a popular talk show. They wanted to discuss my journey, how I went from being the forgotten daughter to a successful writer and entrepreneur. I accepted, half excited, half terrified. When the interview aired, everything changed. My inbox flooded with messages, my social media exploded. Strangers resonated with my story. But mixed in with all the support was something I didn't expect, a familiar name. My parents had seen it, and now they wanted to talk. For years they had ignored me. Now, suddenly, they had something to say. I knew better than to think it was about love or regret. No, this was about something else. Something I could already feel creeping in before they even picked up the phone. The first call came late at night. I didn't answer. The second came the next morning, then the third. By the time I checked my messages, there were at least 10. Missed calls from my mother and a single text from my father. We need to talk. A chill ran through me. Not once in all these years had they tried to reach out. Not when I was struggling. Not when I was building my life from scratch, but now? Now that I was successful, now that people knew my name, suddenly they remembered I existed. Curiosity got the best of me. I answered on the 11th call, bracing myself for whatever excuse they had prepared. My mother's voice was oddly sweet, almost nostalgic. "We saw your interview," she said, like it was some casual conversation. My father cleared his throat. "We're proud of you." I almost laughed. Proud? Where was that pride when they threw me out? Where was that pride when they let my brother destroy my reputation? But I didn't argue. I waited. And then, like clockwork, the real reason surfaced. The house needed renovations. The roof was leaking. Medical bills were piling up. "You've done so well for yourself," my mother said lightly. "It's only fair that you help your family now." Family. As if that word still applied to us. As if they hadn't spent years pretending I didn't exist. I could almost hear the entitlement in their voices, the assumption that I owed them something simply because we shared blood. I let them talk, listing every reason why I should be the solution to their problems. And then, when they finally paused, I gave them mine. "I'll help," I said, keeping my voice calm, "but on one condition." Silence. I could picture them holding their breath. "You admit publicly everything you did to me. The favoritism, the lies, the way you abandoned me. You tell the truth." My mother gasped. My father scoffed. "That's ridiculous." I smiled, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. Then, "I guess you're on your own." I hung up, knowing exactly what was coming next, and I was ready for it. The next morning, my phone lit up with messages, not just from my parents, but from my brother too. His texts were dripping with mockery. "Still holding a grudge? So dramatic. You really think anyone cares about your sob story?" It was almost funny. How quickly he fell back into his old ways. How desperately he wanted to remind me of the role I was supposed to play. The weak one, the outcast, the failure. But he had no idea that I wasn't that person anymore. And this time, I had proof. I scrolled through my old messages, my finger hovering over a screenshot I had saved years ago. A single text from him, sent in a moment of arrogance. "Lowell, I can't believe they actually believed I was scared of you. You never touched me." I stared at it for a long moment before posting it. No caption, no explanation, just the truth. Laid bare for everyone to see. It spread faster than I expected. People from my past started reaching out, old classmates, teachers, even distant relatives. And the message was clear. They finally saw him for what he was. The reaction from my family was immediate. My mother left a voicemail, furious. My father sent a short, threatening message. But my brother, he lost it. "Take it down now. You're ruining my life. You think you're better than us? You're nothing." I read each message carefully, then blocked his number. It was done. I had spent my entire life letting them control the narrative, letting them decide who I was. Not anymore. The legal notice was the final step. A simple document drafted by a lawyer making it clear they were no longer allowed to contact me. No more calls, no more messages, no more games. After years of fighting to be heard, I finally had the last word. And as I sat next to my grandmother sipping coffee in the quiet of her kitchen, I realised something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.